Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Pants. Where we're going, we won't need pants. Or legs. Anakin's fall from the light during episode 3 happened so abruptly. 1 second he's snitching on Palpatine to the Jedi Council, and then a second later he's cut Mace Windu's hand off and murdered a bunch of children. His motivation was to save his wife, who he had seen die in some kind of Force vision. But still, the change in behavior seems very extreme, unless you really intimately know Anakin's relationship with the Jedi Order. Although Anakin tried his best to fit in, the Jedi Order did a lot of terrible things directly to him that I believe ultimately justified his actions. The Jedi Order has a lot on their plate. Now, most of the members within the Jedi Order are kind-hearted and truly want to help the galaxy and all the people living in it. But like any organization that's scaled up to a certain size, they have to become more practical when it comes to decision-making. And so when Qui Gon Jinn spots Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine and finds out that he has a ridiculous amount of midichlorians in his bloodstream, the first course of action for Qui Gon is to figure out how to free the boy from slavery and then recruit him into the Order. Now, we know from his undercover work that Qui Gon Jinn really hated slavery and human trafficking. But he didn't free Anakin out of the kindness of his heart. He wanted the young boy because of the role he would play in the Chosen One prophecy. If Qui Gon Jinn had actually cared about the boy, he would have saved his mother, Shmi Skywalker, from slavery as well. But Qui Gon Jinn decides to leave her behind. The Jedi Order at the time was all about removing attachments from its members. That's why they recruited only newborns and infants that had not become attached or remembered their parents. Anakin, who was 9, was a lot older than your average Jedi and had grown quite attached to his mother, who was raising him all by herself. Now, Qui Gon Jinn was considered an unorthodox Jedi who oftentimes went against the grain. Bringing Anakin in was already against the Jedi Council's wishes, so he might as well have just saved his slave mother as well. I always thought the Jedi were supposed to be the saviors of the broken, the beaten, and the damned. But that's just my own romantic thinking. Like any organization, the Jedi had their own agendas and purposes, and sometimes that means leaving people's mothers behind trapped in slavery. Now, I understand that Qui-Gon wasn't in the position to gamble for both Anakin and his mother because their ship was all messed up and they didn't have enough credits, and they were also being chased by Darth Maul. But you would imagine eventually, once the whole blockade of Naboo situation was sorted, someone would go back for Anakin's mom and save her. The fact that Anakin doesn't go back to Tatooine until the Force starts blasting images of his mom being tortured by Tusken Raiders shows us just how obedient Anakin was to the Order. I mean, what would you have done in his situation? I think I would have spent every day in the Jedi Temple trying to figure out a way to bring her back. Shmi Skywalker died because the Jedi failed to see her as a valuable life. They couldn't even do the simple kindness of freeing her. It didn't even mean that Shmi would be in Anakin's life, but at least Anakin wouldn't have to worry about her suffering. Ultimately, a kindly moisture farmer did free Shmi and married her, but a group of Tusken Raiders came and took her and tortured her to death. Shmi's death would cause Anakin to massacre an entire village of Tusken Raiders in retaliation. This would be his first significant step towards the dark side, courtesy of the Jedi Order. Not only does Qui Gon Jinn separate Anakin from his mother, the Jedi Order didn't even initially want to train him. The primary reason why they'd reject him is because they believe Anakin is too old, as we mentioned before. And Yoda also senses a great deal of fear within the young boy, especially over his mother's future. But considering what the poor boy has just gone through, the lack of compassion and empathy from the Jedi here is startling. If denied entry into the Jedi Order as a recently freed slave with no money or resources, Anakin's situation would have been difficult. Qui Gon Jinn ends up disobeying the Council and wants to take on Skywalker as an apprentice anyway, and the Council begrudgingly allows the issue to be settled at a later date. Although Qui Gon Jinn was always considered a renegade within the Jedi Order, Yoda and the elites actually did offer Qui Gon a seat at the table. They realized that his unorthodox views could have really helped out the Jedi in the long run. And so when Qui Gon Jinn was penetrated by Darth Maul, the Jedi Council granted Qui Gon's dying wish that Anakin be trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anakin never took his time in the Jedi Order for granted. He applied himself ferociously to his studies and especially enjoyed lightsaber training, but the Jedi Temple was still a place full of adolescents. And from my own experiences as a grown-ass man during the coronavirus era, teenagers are extremely terrifying and travel around in large packs on bicycles, stealing your women and children. And so, even though all the teenagers in the Jedi Temple were technically Jedi in training, or Padawans, they were still stupid teenagers and would tease Anakin because he was quite different from everyone else. Being the chosen one was essentially like being the teacher's pet, and attracted a mixture of jealousy and fear. Anakin was also from the Outer Rim and a former slave, which planted another target on his back. Despite all of this negative attention, Anakin never really holds much of a grudge against his peers. I mean, sure, he has some issues controlling his emotions, but so would anyone judged by the Jedi's lofty standards. In my opinion, Anakin handles himself quite well, considering the circumstances. Even though Anakin arrived to the Jedi Temple a bit later than most, he caught up in his courses and training very quickly. As a Padawan under Obi-Wan Kenobi, he distinguished himself in battles and missions and eventually was promoted to the role of Jedi Knight and given his own Padawan Ahsoka Tano. Like Anakin, Ahsoka had very advanced force powers and combat abilities for her age, and the two together would become one of the deadliest pairings in the Jedi Order. But in the last year of the war, a terrorist bombing was carried out against the Jedi Temple. The culprit was Barriss Offee. She was having a crisis of confidence about her current career choice. Barriss Offee was actually a pretty close friend to Ahsoka Tano, so it's especially messed up when Barriss frames Ahsoka for the bombings. Now, Ahsoka and Anakin had been off fighting in the war when the bombing had happened on Coruscant. The two were actually assigned to the investigation after the incident. Barriss was able to frame Ahsoka by remotely killing a suspect with the force that Ahsoka happened to be interrogating in a secured room. This incident definitely looks really sketchy for the young Jedi. After Barriss murders the suspect, she also takes out several clone guards, forcing Ahsoka to flee to the Undercity. Ahsoka is eventually captured and brought forth before the Jedi Council for a trial. Well, it's not a trial like we have here on Earth where you can either defend yourself or have a lawyer argue your case. What happens to Ahsoka is more akin to a sentencing. She basically is expelled by the Jedi Order even though they have no proof or motive that Ahsoka would bomb the Jedi Temple. Anakin, of course, believed in his Padawan's innocence the entire time. He knew that Ahsoka would never betray the Jedi. Luckily, he's able to find Barriss Offee and uncovers her role in the bombing before the military tribunal sentences Ahsoka for treason and terrorism. Although Ahsoka is offered a promotion to Jedi Knight and her position back in the Jedi Order, she refuses. The ordeal has shaken her belief in the Jedi to the core, and not even Anakin can convince her to stay. This is a huge blow to Anakin, who fears above all else being alone and abandoned. And this was all because the Jedi were not willing to give one of their own a fair trial. As the war was reaching its closing point, the Jedi and Supreme Chancellor also began butting heads. The Jedi were becoming wary of the Chancellor's growing executive power. The Senate was actually about to approve another round of emergency power so that Chancellor Palpatine can overlook the transition from wartime to peacetime for the Galactic Republic. Since the Jedi technically answered to the Supreme Chancellor, Palpatine thought it would be a great idea to have Anakin serve as a personal representative of the Supreme Chancellor on the High Jedi Council. The Jedi Council begrudgingly allow Anakin to sit on the council, but are increasingly suspicious of Palpatine and even of the young Jedi, who clearly never asked for any of this. Anakin was still very much focused on winning the war. He wasn't really into politics. Although the High Council allows Anakin to join them, they refuse to promote him to the rank of Master, something they decided he wasn't ready for yet. This of course angers Anakin. No Jedi who's ever sat on the council was lower than the rank of Master, but even his own Master and close friend Obi-Wan Kenobi refuses to vouch for him. To make matters worse, Anakin finds out that the Jedi have placed him in the High Council only so that he can spy on Palpatine. Something that Anakin wasn't comfortable with doing. Palpatine was a close friend and mentor. The Jedi Order only really works if it can hold a high moral ground. But by the end of the Clone Wars, the Jedi were like any other organization in the Republic. They would lie, deceive, and cheat in order to get what they wanted. Despite being treated poorly by the Jedi for his entire life, Anakin still remained loyal to the Order and even reports to the Jedi Council that Palpatine is the Sith Lord they were looking for. Despite all the things Anakin managed to accomplish as a Jedi and also as a commander in the GAR, the Jedi never really fully accept Anakin or trust him. And ultimately, when Mace Windu tries to carry out an extrajudicial execution of the rightfully elected leader of the galaxy, Anakin has to step in and do the right thing and stop him. So as you can see, Anakin Skywalker has a pretty troubling relationship with the Jedi Order. And although Anakin didn't have a lot of options in life and he really just accepted and was even appreciative of the things the Jedi Order gave him, they could have treated him better. because honestly, they needed him more than he needed them. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.